Charlotte, can you hear me from the chambers?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, that's great. Devin, can I have you come off mute and see if we can hear you on Zoom? I can't hear you. Charlotte, can you hear Devin?
No, I can't hear Devin either.
Okay. Devin, it might be your headset if you have headset on.
He said in the chat that he's having mic issues.
Oh, okay.
He's working on it.
Devin, if you want to use your phone as a call-in option for the audio, that's another option too.
Oh, shoot.
I just want to make sure that your audio works if you are called on during the presentation.
Hi. There's like 70 slides, and I tried my best to make it short. We weren't.
Good job to get it done.
I have an update for you. June 21st. For CO3s. So that's when their next meeting will talk about correctional officers with Teamsters. And then another one in mid-August for the other correctional officers. There's like 1 and 2 months.
What's the other date?
Sometime mid-August, it just says. And these meetings are to hear how they want to evaluate the situation. So now we're in the real conversation.
Yep. And I'm meeting with them again next week.
And you can opt to?
No, I think the tricky moment will be June 19th.
Can I steal it for a second? Sure. Yes, right back.
They're not happy. And they tried to blame our staff. I was like, here's the thing.
No, I already told them. I had a phone conversation last week. I said, get rid of the piddly stuff here. You guys, otherwise we're going to go arbitration on the whole thing. They want to move. They're stuck.
Good.
And he just wanted to get this arbitration. And I'm happy to, but I think it's more appropriate to be presented to them. Yeah, he totally is. And so they're really beautiful. And so I took it. And I presented it to the deputy. So can I just... Okay.
Yeah, we have 4 seats. Potentially we have 5 because we have them moved down. They pay mine, so if we move, if we shuffle down 1, there's 5.
I didn't do it.
Yeah, Lee, speak on him. Hello? Okay, great. Mr. Fleming, can I have you test your audio just to make sure that we can hear you in the chambers?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Great.
Okay, and then Devin, can I have you test your audio again?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Can you say that a little louder?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. So that means our audio works from Zoom to the chambers and vice versa. So thank you for doing that with me.
Great, thank you.
We need Kathy or Dean to be sitting here. Where's Kathy or Dean? No. Right. Oh. Oh, good. Hey, how are you? Yes. Yes.
Sure. Sure, for sure. Yep, totally. But I just knew in my heart, I thought, it's not the way things. They didn't want me to sit someplace.
They didn't want you to what?
Sure. I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. But you could believe that, couldn't you?
Oh, I got it now. I'm a little slow.
It's okay. We're just together in terms of emotional support. Yeah, 50 days. Okay. Yeah, let's not do that. Yeah.
I'd like to call to order the Public Safety Committee. Our discussion today would be over reimagining justice for youth, and I'll ask the County Attorney, John Choi, to kick it off.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Board of Commissioners and County Manager. It's a real pleasure to be here today, to be here in partnership with our community and talk about a long journey that we have taken in the function of the County Attorney's Office and the work that we do in terms of our role in the youth justice system. It was about more than 3 years ago where we undertook this journey to say that we wanted to reimagine our justice system for young people and to see if there was a different way in which we could chart a course forward. And I got to say that to think about reimagining a system was at first very difficult, because oftentimes where we created these flow charts, and oftentimes after we tried to tinker with it, it looked very much the same, right? And so through a lot of conversations and meetings with community and looking at data, which is a big piece of this, and you're going to hear from, as a part of the presentation today, some of the data research that we have done, looking back 10 years in our youth justice system, and then thinking about a path forward. And one of the things that has always struck me is that in many ways the youth justice system and all of our things that we do is because of the volume of work that we have. We often assemble things in an assembly line format. And we do things repetitively over and over, and we have this adversarial system by which the prosecutor represents the state's interest, and we're charged with proving something beyond a reasonable doubt, and then the defense is there to uphold the rights of the person accused. And we do that over and over again. And I really believe that one of the most dangerous things that we can have is to not be skeptical or question the current paradigms that we have, right? And so what this effort is really to reimagine all of that. Instead, to think about a collaborative relationship between the person accused, the defense, the prosecutor, to actually bring in community to be a part of some of the decision making. The values that Ramsey County has made very clear about sharing power with their community, especially that aspect of community that has been most impacted by the criminal justice system. And so we're charting a course here today that really is very unique. It's very novel. We've been at it for over, with the conversations and the meetings and the planning, we've been at it for 3 years. We kind of did a light start back in July of this past year because this was so new. We didn't have a model to look to. So we had to kind of come up with this on our own. And we started in July, and we had some pushback this past winter by our sheriff. And that got us to re-energize our efforts to make sure that we, crossed our T's and dotted our I's. We also did outreach to all of the stakeholders, including the police, to make sure that they understood that this is not a diversion program. It's really a process that we're changing the way that we make the decision to allow for a better decision, I think, to be made. Not a decision that's just based upon a police report and what happened, but a way in which, through a partnership with the public defender and community, that we can get more information about the needs of the young person, the family, and also the victim to find out what they actually want. And so I am really excited about this new chapter that we are undertaking in our youth justice system here in Ramsey County. The goal, and this is my promise to all of you, is that I believe that what we are doing moving forward over the course of the next 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, that we will have better outcomes than we had over the past 10. And I know that we can do that when we are grounded in community. We are not ignoring racial disparity that exists and actually centering that work in the office and in the decisions to see all of the people, the victims, those young people who stand accused of a crime, and those families who love those kids, to humanize all of those people, to see them. And that's the work that lies ahead of us. I want to end my remarks by introducing somebody that is going to be a real critical piece of that work moving forward, Kevin Fleming. Kevin, I want you to stand up. Kevin is our new interim director for our Youth Justice Division. Maria Mitchell, who was a part of this work as the leader of the division over the past year, has now become a Ramsey County District Court judge. So a lot of that will fall on Kevin. And also behind me is Erica Schumacher, who has played a really critical role in bringing all of this together. And as well as Ann Pletz in my office, who also retired back in the winter. So, and there's a lot of other people as a part of our community leadership team that you're going to get a chance that Erica is going to introduce them, but also they're going to have a part of this presentation today. And so I'm just really proud of the work that's been done in collaboration, and I just want to say thank you to all of the community partners, to the staff in my office, who've worked tirelessly to, despite the pushback, the criticism, they have figured out a way forward. And again, will always be a continuous learning process, and we're going to always try to improve at all times. And try to meet all of the needs that we have in our community. But I'm really proud of this effort, and so I'm going to turn it over to Erica Schumacher to talk a little bit more about the many PowerPoint slides that you're going to see, but we're going to do them very quickly. But this is really important information. It represents 3 years of conversation and action and leadership and collaboration. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Before you begin, Erica, in that vein, there is a lot of information here, so I'm going to ask the board, unless it's a real critical question at the time, just to hold those questions as much as possible to the end. Erica?
Thank you, Commissioner. And before I begin, we actually have Jim Fleming via Zoom, I believe, who's going to provide a little bit of context. He was our head public defender at the time when John approached him about this work. And so we've asked him to share his remarks about why he wanted to join this work as from his perspective as the head public defender.
Thank you. I want to thank the board for allowing me to appear on Zoom today. I just want to share with you, I think some insight about the background as to how this came about. Actually, the seeds of this really started in community based on a overall dissatisfaction of how the justice system as a whole was responding to community. Many members of community felt that the justice system was weaponized against communities of color, and that the outcomes on a greater system level were very negative and weren't doing the things that the justice system had promised. And John and I had a number of conversations about how we saw this, and they were sort of honest in the sense that we weren't sort of in our advocacy positions. We were just sort of trying to explore what we thought was wrong, what we thought might need to happen. And we felt that if you're going to change the system meaningfully, the first place is to start where people, young people, enter into the system and sort of examine how they are, what's going on with them. Now, there's a broader classification, there's a broad category of cases that come into the system that are, I mean, I'm not suggesting, I don't tend to minimize the consequences of them, but they aren't as necessarily as serious. They might involve thefts, fightings, assaults, drinking, and some of those pour out into other areas of crime that develop. But what John and I noticed is that in these category of cases that it took a long time for these cases to get into the system. So a young person would be investigated, charges would be considered, and it would take a long time for that case to get into the system because of just the compression of the calendars of getting kids in. And of course, when you brought these children into the system 9 months after the fact, I mean, there truly was a disconnect about the behavior that happened and what was and how it was impacting the kids. And of course, we thought that initially what we really truly needed to do was sort of examine the data, look at that, see how these cases were impacting youth. As a public defender, I could tell you that we saw two things that we noticed in these category of cases is that you had parents would come in and say, you know, we dealt with this at home, and why are we being petitioned into court 9 months after the fact? And of course, it didn't have it was having a negative consequence on the kid who was being brought in and then having to come through the system. And then we were bringing them into a system, as John described, as sort of an assembly line process where everybody was sort of doing their constitutionally due process requirements, and then we would finish up the case and be done. And the kids sort of, and as a public defender, we knew that something was missing. They weren't having an impact. So what we reached out to community in this process. We certainly learned that community was well aware of the distinction or the separation of time, and that what was happening in the juvenile system was having minimal impact on the kids, and that the youth didn't seem to understand what impact they may have had on the person that they'd harmed. And we began to sort of explore a restorative process where young people would be brought in, would meet the people that they had affected. We thought and believed, based on the studies that we understood, that this would have certainly a greater impact and an immediate and have more immediacy on changing behavior than sort of bringing it into the traditional due process system, which is essentially get in line and then hopefully hopefully that something could meaningfully happen, which we knew we were having very poor outcomes. Now, community sort of stepped up and said, these are our kids. We certainly are concerned about how they're being treated. We're certainly concerned that in this process, when you bring them in, they're being stigmatized and labeled. That the impact that you think that you're trying to have on kids long after the fact that something's happened, essentially sends an incredibly negative message to youth that they're bad. And what we know is that a lot of the young people who are brought into the system can be impulsive, can do bad things that are, that have consequences, but they're not bad kids. And we know that the mission from the juvenile justice system from well over 100 years ago, its intention was not to stigmatize kids and label kids and treat them as criminals, but to sort of promote the change in behavior. And over the course of this process, we began to craft what we had this community model of a team brought together to sort of evaluate these cases, along with my office, John's office, and the community, to sort of look at the prosecution or police narrative and bring other information to the table. Kids who are in this process are acknowledged that what they have done is what they did is wrong, but there's an opportunity for some advocacy on the part of community and a part of my former office to sort of explain or bring other facts to light that should be considered before we get into this the adversarial system, and then bring this case into what we call a restorative justice process, a circle, where our young people meet the folks that they've harmed. They have consequence in community, that they have some appreciation, that community does support them, does love them, does want them to do well, and they can make these connections, which I think are all part very positive.
Thank you, Jim. I don't want to cut you off, but we are short on time, and we have a lot of slides. So we really appreciate you joining this morning via Zoom and sharing some of your perspective as the head public defender. And we're going to get into the PowerPoint slides because I know we've got a lot to get through. So thank you very much. So now that we've heard from our head public defender, we're going to hear from one of our community members who came to the table about why it was important for community to come. Yes, Commissioner.
Excuse me, Eric. I don't mean to interrupt you again. I'm a bit remiss that I didn't introduce the community members. So why don't we do that now? And I just realized that there might be some board members that the community has not met either. So why don't we quickly go around this table? I make the assumption, because I tend to know everybody, that we all know each other. But go ahead. Could we begin with you?
Sure. I'm Brenda Burnside. I'm a community member, as are all of us.
Yeah.
Right? And I work with the CRT. I'm the community member representing on the CRT.
Great.
Thanks.
Cara Beckman. I work at the University of Minnesota as a researcher in youth development.
Nicole Fredham, Commissioner, District 1.
Victoria Reinhardt, Commissioner, District 7.
Tony Carter, Commissioner, District 4.
Trista Mattis Castillo, District 3.
Rafael Ortega, District 5.
Ryan O'Connor, County Manager.
Jim McDonough, District 6.
Mary Jo McGuire, Commissioner, District 2.
John Choi, County Attorney.
Yeah, we clap.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Tamara Madison, owner and founder of Generation to Generation.
Thank you.
And we also have Juliet. Will you please introduce yourself? We're out of chairs, but we have more community folks.
Juliet Mitchell, I'm with Generation to Generation.
Yes, I was going to introduce Amy during it, but we can introduce Amy now. So Amy Vang, sitting next to Juliet, is our new Youth Services Coordinator. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that position, but we're very excited to have her on board.
Very excited.
And that was a perfect segue because it allowed Dr. Raj to grab some coffee, which I know that he wanted before he spoke this morning. So I will turn it over to Dr. Raj to share a little bit about why it was important for community to come to the table.
Can you all hear me? Great, awesome. I would say, right, part and parcel of the invitation to community is about practicing what Bell Hooks calls truth-telling, right? The idea of truth-telling also involves this idea of engaging in the change-making process, in the transformation, in the abolition, in the liberation work. One cannot just come here and walk away from that perspective frustrated, but all of that frustration, all of that emotion, all of that body of pain and trauma needs to be present in the process of transformation. And transformation equals to this idea of repairing harm, right? Our current justice system is not interested in repairing the harm, rather pay a price for the harm, right? Paying a price for the harm over the past number of years, hundreds of years, have not led to how we represent our values in our community. So in a restorative lens, in a transformative lens, the invitation is to examine how the community can bring their voice of hurt and pain and trauma so that the person who caused the harm also gets to hear fundamentally how they have undone their life. In their mind, they often say, I just do what I did, right? And I pay a price for what I did, versus understanding there's a ripple effect in any of these particular actions that somebody takes, right? And we fail to recognize the ripple effect, right, when it comes to the environmental damages and harm that we are doing, the harm that we do in so many different practices and forms. In this particular journey, right, when we think about racial healing, right, we cannot just think about racial healing as a separate component, because criminal justice system, right, the so-called criminal justice system has continuously caused harm to racial communities or racial minority communities, right? Black and indigenous bodies have been harmed over the past 500, 400 years of this history of this country. So if we don't start to engage the community, and at the same table, right? This is a nice table, but when I say table, I meant a circle where we are all vulnerable and we are all engaged in this process of saying, right, I kind of relate to, right? I don't have to agree with you, but I relate to what you are saying. I understand the community that we are a part of. So because of the way that we are all part and parcel of this community, your harm, the harm that you caused, has affected and changed all of us, right? We are all walking around with all kinds of cautionary, right, fear in our body. And we're also taking physical, right? People in Texas are carrying weapons, right? Because we haven't addressed the impact of the harm, we simply punish people, right? So the invitation today for us in this process, as Jim, as John, right, and many others will witness today, that we are not about trying to just share power. We are trying to decenter the courts. We want to decenter law enforcement in any form of compliance so that we can center the voice of the community. Love y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raj. So about 3 years ago, we formed this Reimagining Justice for Youth leadership team, which is made up of about 25 people of system and community leaders. And we've been meeting weekly or bi-weekly. We started out by laying the foundation for the work that we're doing. So these are some of the foundational learnings we had. So Cara and her colleague, Avi, at the time, talked to us about youth development and stages of youth development so we can better understand young people's behavior in the context of what's normally appropriate for the kids that age, right? We learned about brain development. We brought in folks around collateral consequences so we could understand the impacts not only of the decisions we make directly on the young person, but what collateral consequences might follow them as a result, right at the time when they're trying to transition to self-sufficiency, get jobs, get apartments, get education loans, right? So we really spent a lot of time trying to learn about different aspects of young people and the justice system. That included a trip back in July of 2019 to Yellow Medicine County. So Yellow Medicine County, for the past about 17 years, has found a way to really integrate restorative practices into their systems response. So not only in a delinquency context, but they're using circles in a child protection context to help keep kids and families together. So we were really inspired by the work that they've done, and we wanted to learn about it. So we brought this is most of the folks that came, but we had at least 5 more folks that had to duck out early and weren't part of the picture. But we brought folks from across our systems in Ramsey County, across our community, to really delve in and learn more about how they were able to embed these restorative practices within their system. So I'm going to turn it over to Brenda Burnside. And Brenda also, thanks to your community investment dollars, Brenda has been working with us for the past several years as community capacity, as we're co-leading this work. And so we didn't mention that yet, so I just want to mention that before Brenda shares this quote from Fania Davis. So Brenda, sure, yep.
She's
Good morning. And I also talk with my hands, so I thought I'd be up here. But I wanted to share first the definition of restorative practices. It's one that I use quite often in training, and it is from Fania Davis's book, and she actually quotes another person in restorative practices. But this really gets at what we mean when we say restorative justice. So she says restorative justice is a justice that seeks not to punish, but to heal. A justice that is not about getting even, but about getting well. A justice that seeks to transform broken lives, broken relationships, and communities rather than shatter them further. A justice that seeks reconciliation rather than a deepening of conflict. A healing justice rather than a harming justice. And, I read that definition, and every time I read it, it really speaks to me about what we're trying to do. We want to heal broken relationships. We want to heal broken community. And I think about the fact that sometimes I hear this quote, cages don't heal. No. Them sitting there does not heal, right? How do we bring about a transformation that is meaningful, a transformation that is meaningful not only to the person, but to the community? I think about the impact that we want to make. We want people to feel the impact of their actions, not necessarily to be punished for them, but to learn from them, right? And when I can feel that and how I'm affecting people, it's a whole different story. And I'll even tell a story, and it's very interesting, about Trista. Fireworks, we live in the same community, and fireworks go off in our community. And she made me to realize through her email message about how it impacted people who were veterans, right? People who hear those and what it does to them. Now, I personally love fireworks, but I think about how does that affect my community? How does that affect everyone, not just me, right? So even though I love the lights and I love all of that, and I always go down and watch them, from whatever corner of the city I can, we have to think about how do our actions, how do our words, how do those things impact our community? And when I feel that, I act differently, right? I act differently. That's what we want people. We want people to know the difference between accountability and consequence are not the same thing. Right? We want to bring about accountability without punishment. And the question that I raise in my trainings, can we do that? Yes, can we accomplish accountability without punishment?
Yes.
And I think we can. We can have people take responsibility for things and feel that impact. We don't have to give them the rod, right? And I think that people are at the level of consciousness, we know how to do that, right? We know how to do that. We have brains, we have hearts. And one of the quotes that I really love is from The Little Prince. I read a lot of kids' books. Okay, I'm in education. I like to read to kids. And it says, it's with the heart that one sees rightly. What is real is invisible to the eye. So that was what I just wanted to share in terms of our restorative work. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to heal communities. We're trying to heal people. We're trying to make them better. And I'm hoping that we all are trying to make ourselves better in the process. That mindset change has to happen from the inside out. So if I don't change my mind, just because I sit in a circle, it doesn't make it different. And so I try to get people to see things differently. And I don't know if you've ever seen those images where it's like 2 or 3 different pictures in the same image. When you've seen that image and you start to see the next image, it's hard to get back to the old one. That's what we want. We don't want to necessarily come back to that old one, the old way of doing things. And, you know, people talk about the good old days. Let me tell you, they weren't that good. Okay? We worked hard in the old days to make things happen that kids can do on a computer now with a couple of, you know, hits of. I love technology. I tell my kids, I'm not trying to go back to that. I was scrubbing pans and you know, like we used to have to wash out clothes in the basket, you know, in that little tin pot. You had to have the number 5. You know, you put the bleach in it and everything. I don't want to do that anymore. I got a wash machine, and a good one. So anyway, I just want us to, you know, think about how we do things, where stuff comes from, why we have the mindsets that we do, and maybe it's not from a good place. And if it's not from a good place, let's do away with it. Why keep doing something that isn't working? Why keep doing things that don't serve us well? And I think this is one that we have to agree has not served us well. It hasn't helped our communities, it hasn't helped our kids, and it's not helping us to be better. So. Erica didn't give me the.
Thank you, Brenda. So one of the things that we wanted to understand in the beginning is what behaviors are we being asked to respond to in the justice system. So this is a quick snapshot of now 11 years of data, cases that were referred to our office. So you can see those top 3 lines. The top line is theft. That next black line is disorderly conduct, so you can see those have gone down significantly over time. That green line is different levels of assaults, and that red line is aggravated robberies. And so you can see that during the pandemic, for the first time, aggravated robberies were in kind of that top 3 categories. So this is a snapshot of the number of cases referred to us by severity. So you can see it's vacillated over time, but those blue boxes are misdemeanor level offenses. So you can see that those went down during the pandemic, the less serious referrals, but those black boxes on the bottom are felony referrals. And so you can see in 2020, we actually experienced an increase in felony level referrals to our office, and then it went back down again in 2021. So one of the things we wanted to understand, we heard from law enforcement, they felt like they were going out and intervening with the same young people over and over, and they were getting out and then repeating the behavior. And so we asked our data analysts to take a look at how many young people had more than one case referred in a single calendar year. So if you look at this data, it shows that there was an uptick in the percentage of young people in 2020, but the numbers actually went down. And so that's what our data shows. And so this is something that we shared with law enforcement as well. So now we want to hear a little bit more community context about what are some of the contributing local factors that were contributing to this behavior recently in our community. So Brenda, do you want to talk from there, or do you want to come back?
No, I'm going to come back. I've been sitting on a plane for hours, so let me, you know, move around a little bit. So I want to bring this issue into context. First, the historical context that we sit in. Often, you know, when we start our circles, we start with a land acknowledgement, and we do that because there were twin genocides that happened on this soil. It's hard to step over all of that, especially for our young people, and to start to talk about something that's happening now without putting that into context. So I want to ask you the question. How many of you know when the first classification of race happened in these United States? Does anybody know? Take a guess. 1790. It happened in 1790. And does anybody know the method that they used for classification? Anybody?
It was
the census. It was the U.S. Census, right? So in 1790, the first classifications were taxed or untaxed. Who were the taxed? All of us, right? The untaxed were the Native Americans because we had taken the land by treaty, right? So that's the first classification. Second classification, guess what it was? Anybody? Slave or free. Slave or free. And then as people started to come to this country, we added categories to that. And when we added those categories, many people will say that it was to include them. But I would argue that it was to exclude, because we were trying to figure out how much of a piece of the pie they were entitled to, right? So when the Chinese came over, we made another category. Hispanics were included in as whites until a certain, I think it was 1930 or something like that. But anyway, we don't necessarily ever think about what is the racial context that we sit in, but our young people feel that. That racial stuff that comes up, even with the Native American, when we give that land acknowledgement, a certain level of healing happens when you at least acknowledge the harm. Right? Let's at least acknowledge it. Let's say it happened, right? Let's stop trying to take away the stories. The kids need to know the stories. They need to know where they fit in the stories, right? And that's how we begin to kind of unpack some of those things. So when we look at some of the behaviors that the youth have now, if we take them out of this context, it doesn't make any sense. It makes the kids look crazy, right? But we have to look at the fact that the system is crazy, the kids are not. Right? The system is crazy. So the kids feel all of that harm. They feel all of those things that are coming up and they don't know why. So they feel crazy too. But the thing about it is when we put it in context, let's look at how it looks. Like our choices on the east side of St. Paul look very different from the ones in Highland. I can't walk out of my door on the east side necessarily and find this rec center or find this beautiful park or find these wonderful tennis courts or find all of those things. So my choices become what? Crime, probably. My choices become something that maybe is, maybe not as healthy, not as positive, right? But I want to engage in my community. Everybody needs belongingness. We need that engagement, right? So I think about the choices that some of the people on the east side might have had during COVID-19. The schools were closed, the rec centers were closed, the libraries were closed. What was there to do in the neighborhood? What was there to do? You're going to put your hand to something. What are you going to do? You walk out of your house in the morning, what are you going to do? Okay, so I think about all of those things in the context of it. Don't try to take it out of the context, because we do that a lot, right? We just look at this kid and you say, oh, okay, well, they did this thing, it was horrible, that kind of thing. We don't think about where did they come from. We don't think about where do they live. We don't think about the resources that are available in their communities. We don't think about any opportunities that they may not even know about, right? And many families really don't. There was also loss of income, there was home instability, and when we're on the CRT, that's what we think about. But we also need to take into account the fact that Philando Castile happened. We have to take into account that George Floyd happened, and our kids are feeling some type of way about that. And even in the schools, I'm sad to say, we don't ask kids how they feel or how they think about it. I mean, do you even know how your children or grandchildren feel about those tragedies that have happened? Kids carry that inside of them, and it comes out in one way or another. And when we don't even stop to ask the question, how do you feel? Are you okay? Are you all right? That's the humanity of it. We have to look at the humanity of people. And it's interesting that when we say humanize, why do I have to humanize a human being? Why should I have to do that? I should already see that this is humanity, right? So that's what we really teach people to do in this process. Look at the humanity in everyone. My only definition for restorative practices is seeking the humanity in everyone and prioritizing it above their actions. Because we're more than just what we do. We're more than just what we do. Underneath this, I am a person. All of these layers come down to a human being. And so I try to shed the layers and have people actually think about what is your humanity, and when you see your humanity, you see the humanity of others better. So let's think about the context. As we go forward with this conversation, I want us to realize that this happens in a context, and think about what that context is. Not just the action, but the whole context that it was created in.
Thank you, Brenda. So another thing that we want to understand is who is involved in the cases referred to our office. So this is cases referred by gender. You can see that they've always been disproportionately young males referred to our office. This is cases referred by race. That top blue line is African American young people. And this graph actually demonstrates a little bit better the disproportionality. So that light blue box is the percent of the population that racial or ethnic group comprises. The dark blue is the percent of referrals to our office. So you can see both with respect to African American and Indigenous young people, they're getting referred to our office many times more than their share of the population. In terms of understanding what outcomes we're getting from the traditional system, we asked our data analysts, and we've partnered with the University of Minnesota to look at 10 years of our data from 2010 to 2019 on kids that had already aged out of the system. So it really captures their full experience in the system. So this is a snapshot of that experience. That bottom blue bar is one referral young people, so kids that were referred to us once between the ages of 10 to 17 and then never again. And as you go up, you see we have kids that were referred 20, 30, 40 times from the age of 10 to 17. So we know that what we're doing with those kids is not working. We also wanted to understand what the racial disparities look like within the context of those referrals. So those single referral group of young people was about half Black young people. The 2 to 5 referral group was more than 2/3 Black young people. The 6 to 12 referral group was 87% Black, and that top 12 plus referral group was 98% Black. So you can see that as the contacts with our office increased, those racial disparities increased significantly. The other thing we wanted to understand is if young people in our system were ending up in the adult system, because if we're effective at what we're doing to intervene with young people, our hope is that they don't end up in the adult system, right? And so the good news is that 80% of young people did not end up with an adult felony charge in Minnesota, but of the young people who did, the percent increased with contacts, increased contacts to our office. So you can see where the arrow is right now. Those are kids that's still single referral kids. Only about 13% of them ended up in the adult system. When you get to the 13 plus referral kids, 70% of them ended up in the adult system. We also wanted to understand if the severity of the referral mattered. And so to the left of that black line is petty or misdemeanor charges. Those are less serious charges. To the right of the line is gross misdemeanor or felony charges. So you can see both with respect to the number of contacts with our office, but also the severity, young people are much more likely to end up in the adult system. So I'm going to turn it over to Cara now. One of the things we wanted to understand was what is our baseline data? What are the outcomes that we're getting in our traditional system so that as we go forward and try to improve, we can compare it against that baseline. And so Cara's got a bunch more slides, but for the purposes of today, she's just going to talk about the findings for the baseline data analysis.
Thanks, Erica. So ultimately, just in looking at that data analysis we did and really trying to center within the county attorney's decision-making authority, what kind of outcomes were what kind of conclusions could we draw from those outcomes we just gave you a snapshot of. There's much more behind that. And so ultimately, and first I'd really want to commend the county attorney and his team and the community for saying, can we just look at the data? Because we're pretty sure that what we're telling you in terms of this not working would show up in the data too. And that doesn't happen enough. I think public-private sector partnerships that really are transparent in saying we could look at this. So I just want to commend you all for being a part of that. But ultimately, findings, we came to the conclusion that the traditional legal system responses are not meeting the needs of young people. We've heard people talk about young people needing to understand harm, the impact on others, and have an opportunity to learn and grow when they make a mistake. And so, as you just saw, the more often a young person is referred to the legal system, the less effective the responses are, and we can see that both within, so the first example there, we can see that both within their contact as a young person, so if they come back to the juvenile system twice, they're much more likely to come back a third time. If they come back a third time, and then we also saw that as far as adult court involvement as well. We also just saw traditional legal system response to serious behaviors are least effective. So the behavior that is causing the most harm in our community is what we have, the least effective answers for. I think that's what we would really want to kind of double down on and say, let's figure this out together. So you just saw that in the slide that Erica just walked through. And then finally, traditional legal system responses are especially ineffective for Black, Latinx, Indigenous youth, as well as our youngest youth. We can come back to data on that too, but but the younger people are the first time they're referred, the more likely they are to come back. And so we just really need to kind of do a better job of capturing the experience of young people and then taking into account development. And not only what is kind of normative and typical and necessary for a young person as they're exploring who they want to be in the world, but what actually helps them learn and grow after they make a mistake at different ages and stages of development. And so with that, to kind of tailor in on the so what, right? So we know if we're not being effective in these areas, then let's kind of improve. So what we came back recommending was, really working with community to figure out how to do better by Black and American Indian youth and our youngest youth, to focus less on, so while we know we're being ineffective based on looking at the data by severity of behavior, what we saw in really analyzing the charge decisions of the county attorney's office was that there seemed to be a response based on that level of behavior. But what we know from research is that behavior is much more, the severity of the behavior is much more a reflection of the context that youth are living in than anything internal in that young person. So the same needs are driving the behavior, and we need to focus on young people in their, as Brenda was saying, as in their humanity, in their holistic self, and focus on that to figure out how to move forward, not was it a serious or a not serious behavior, because that isn't reflective. So focus less on that severity in determining the response so that we can get to an effective response, and then find effective responses for youth with multiple felony referrals to avoid that negative impact. If you dig into the literature on this, you'll see a lot of information about labeling theory. Once a young person kind of gets that label, it can really kind of begin to impact how they see themselves in the world and what they see their future as. So that's where we landed.
Thank you, Cara. So just a little bit also about what we've learned about youth behavior and development. So about youth, we know that the brain is not fully developed until age 25. The young people in our office are being referred at 10 to 17. They're far from having a fully formed brain, right? We know, as Cara said, that behaviors are driven by needs. We know about our disparity data, and we know about human behavior and our justice response, that we need swift, sure, fair responses. And as Jim pointed out in the beginning, our system does not always deliver that. And we also know that excluding young people from school and family and community can be detrimental and traumatizing. About the science of youth development, we know that young people are less able to regulate their behavior when emotions are high. We know that they're more sensitive to peer pressure and immediate rewards. Any of you who've had children know this. We also know that they're just less able to make informed decisions that require them to consider some of those long-term consequences. And so we've also studied the brain science with respect to trauma. So Dr. Bruce Perry is a leading neuroscientist, and his work has really demonstrated that when we punish young people, we actually inhibit their learning and self-reflection and empathy, because we keep them in their brainstem, which is where the fight, flight, freeze is, and they literally can't access their cortex, which is where all of that learning happens, the empathy development, their ability to self-regulate their own behavior. So his model is called, he refers to it as the 3 R's. He says, first we have to help young people regulate, then we need to relate to them, and only then can we begin to reason with them. So when you hear community talk about how important relationships are, the brain science literally backs that up. So this tells us that we need a differentiated approach. For those young people that are just going to get referred to us once and never again, we need to have the lightest touch possible, because more contact begets more contact, right? But for those young people at the top that are getting referred over and over again, we need to have more intensive engagement, where we're really trying to address what are those underlying causes and contributors where young people are getting referred to our office. So the point of this is we know better, so we must do better. I've already walked through some of these in the interest of time. I'm just going to skip this slide. But we're trying to shift to more restorative responses that really promote meaningful accountability. So the way that the traditional system is set up is around accountability to the state, where you have a disconnected adult administering consequences, and those also trigger collateral consequences for young people. That's more likely to engender defiance and shame, which can actually impede growth and development, and has been shown to triple the odds of being arrested as an adult. Versus if we shift to accountability to family and community, where we give young people the opportunity to actively make things right without the labeling and the long-term effects, that's been shown to actually engender perspective and empathy and healing, which are key developmental markers for young people, which can foster their growth and development, and has been shown to reduce by more than twice their odds of being further arrested in the coming year. So our vision around reimagining justice for youth is to shift to those restorative responses that focus on identifying needs, repairing, and healing from harm caused. So we're sharing power with our community to determine how do we best understand and address those underlying needs and things that are contributing to harmful behavior. How do we help young people learn and grow through developmentally appropriate responses and give them an opportunity to make amends for the harm that was caused? How do we ask young people what they need to succeed and connect them to community-based resources, and then also especially connect them to school, community, and caring adults, because we know the research shows that caring adults are the one thing that can help young people overcome adversity in their lives. So this is an infographic that describes our vision for this new system. So the dots represent incidents in our community, and our vision is that when conflict happens, when incidents of harm happened, we hope to have more community-based problem solving that doesn't need the justice system by empowered communities and law enforcement who are showing up in a restorative manner, schools that are able to resolve things in their own communities. But we know some cases will still need to be referred to the justice system. And so when they do come in, our attorney first does a legal review to make sure there's legal sufficiency to proceed. If not, the case is declined. If so, the vision is that the case goes to a collaborative review team. And this collaborative review team consists of a community member, who right now is Brenda Burnside, a public defender representative, and a county attorney from our office. And they jointly review the case. We also are reaching out right now. We are working with contracted restorative practice practitioners who are reaching out to the victim or people who are harmed in the process to get their input into that. And then if the collaborative review team meets and decides they need more information, then Brenda will reach out to the family of the young person who's referred. And we've gotten some incredibly helpful information from families and joint problem solving that's been really helpful to the collaborative review team as they think about, of those 4 boxes on the right, what are they going to recommend to us in terms of how to respond to this case? So they could recommend connecting back with the parent caregivers and community resources, and that's done. There's no need for justice system involvement. They could suggest that we refer directly to community-based accountability. So we have some contracted providers, one of whom is with us today, to share a little bit about their experiences working with young people. They can petition first, and petitioning is the equivalent of charging in the youth system, and then refer to community-based accountability. And then if the young person successfully completes, then the case is dismissed. Or they can suggest that we pursue it through the traditional court route. And so another thing that was really important to us, and I think Cara already mentioned this, is that we wanted to produce transformative change and sustainable change. And so we asked, like, what do we need to be thinking about as we're thinking about how best to do this? And so they presented us this model of systems change. And essentially what it says is you can change practices and policies and resources, but unless you get to those mental models that underlie why we do what we do, it's too easy for it to just revert back. And so that's what we're really focused on. So as a result, we came up with what we call a paradigm shift document. We don't have time to walk through it today, but we are happy to talk to you more about all of this stuff. But essentially, we're trying to be really intentional about these conversations. So like, for instance, we tell people right now, anything you say can and will be used against you. Well, that's not a safe space to have honest conversation, right? And to be able to say what's really gone on and what they've done. And so in our reimagined system, we want to provide that safe space where young people can be honest, and then we can have an opportunity for that meaningful accountability. So I will just skip through those slides. So we want to just convey to you that we are sharing power with community in 3 really important ways. One is through the co-design, through our leadership team. One is through the decision-making process, through that collaborative review, as opposed to the traditional review process. And then one is in terms of actually responding to the cases that are coming into our office. So we're building up a continuum of restorative, community-based alternatives where partners in the community can help us try to meet those goals. And so I'm going to turn it over to Brenda to share this quote about why community needs to be involved in order for it to be restorative.
Sorry, you guys, the words are in my feed. So the quote that I will share is, restorative justice puts a human face on the handling of crime and violence. Rather than being purely punitive in approach, restorative justice involves the entire community. We cannot find solutions for people or be restorative without including them in the solution, right? They have to be at the table. So often we talk about people, we prescribe things for their lives, and we don't even know them, right? We have to pull people to the table. We have to find out what are the needs, how can we help? How can we make this a meaningful experience and not just something that happens to you but actually includes you in the process. So I just wanted to make sure that we are putting that human face on, always thinking there is a person behind whatever action has taken place. So always want to keep that front of mind.
Thank you, Brenda. Okay, and so these are the considerations for the collaborative review team. So as we came up with this vision, we were talking about how are we going to translate this to the people who are actually going to be implementing it. And so these are the questions under those 3 goal statements that we came up with that the collaborative review team actually thinks through as they're responding to cases. Another thing that our data analyst, Devin, came up with, who is on the Zoom and has done a lot of work for this, so I want to recognize him, is developing this, what we call a harm and needs matrix. So in the restorative process, it's all about assessing harm and needs. And so we're trying to make sure that as our collaborative review team thinks through these cases, they're thinking about, everything from, is this kind of a low-level behavior? There wasn't much harm caused. This is like typical young people risk-taking. It's what they do when they're a teenager, all the way up to there was some significant harm caused. There seemed to be significant needs, and we really need to focus on our intervention here. And so this is some research-based guidance that CARA came up with to help the collaborative review team think through this. So if it's a lower harm, lower needs case, that might be something really appropriate to return to family. That's something that family can respond to, right? If there's lower harm but higher youth needs, that might be really appropriate for case management. So we have multiple folks that provide case management services for young people to try to address those needs. If there's a greater degree of harm but a lower youth need, that might be really appropriate for a pre-charge or pre-petition restorative justice process. And if there's higher harm and higher needs, that might be more appropriate for post-charge or traditional court. So Brenda, I'm going to turn it over to you to just demonstrate how community-based accountability produces meaningful accountability.
So in the slide that you're looking at, we start off with a process where we do the acknowledgement, the land acknowledgement, the enslavement acknowledgement. That's to set the context. And then we go to actually setting up guidelines for having the conversation that we want to have. How do we share values? How do we build relationships? How do we tell our stories? And so often, sometimes when I'm in meetings like this, we don't tell the stories that are behind it, right? So you don't get that understanding. When you give those examples, it's like sometimes people will misunderstand your words, but the examples kind of ring true and make it a little clearer. But we always want to hear the story of the young person. So some of the things that I find out is when I go back to the, after reading the police report and something looks a little screwy on it, this doesn't add up or it doesn't make any sense, I go back to the family and I ask them, well, what happened? What was the real story? And then they tell me the story and it's something totally different from what we've read on the page. Completely different. And when we think about some of those questions we ask, where's this young person from? Where do they go to school? What has happened that has brought them to this place or to this point in their experience? It's a whole different world. It's a whole different world. So we start from a whole different place. So when we are talking about the case, it's one thing. And then we turn around and we say, no, they need this. They don't need that. They need housing stability first. They need this or they need that. That's why they're reacting. The reason they don't go to school is because they live 100 miles from where the school is, and we have to, get them in. So we hear their story. After that, we want the person to acknowledge the harm. So I always ask people, what can you take responsibility for this minute? Before we even start talking about it, what do you know you've done? My bad, I made a mistake, I messed up, right? So I ask them that first. And then we go into, how does that harm, impact your community? How does it affect everybody? How has it blown up the whole system? How has it messed up the ecosystem, right? And then I ask them, how will you fix it? This is your thing to fix. I didn't do it. Fix it. What's your idea? What's your creative solution? And sometimes they come up with them right away. And they say, well, I don't know what I can do. But I said, well, what are you good at? What can you offer your community? And I would ask everybody that. What can you offer your community? What do you have that's in your, personal portal that you can offer up for all of the gifts that you receive from community? So anyway, once we do that and they come up with these things like, well, I can do this, or I can cook, or I can do that. That kind of thing opens a whole new world because we're including them in that solution, right? They have to fix it. And I used to tell my students that all the time at school. I'm like, you did this. Can you fix it? I mean, that just makes my life easier. So then, we go on to, have them express their empathy, and we develop a plan together.
We develop a plan together. I always tell my kids, no one person is bigger than this whole family. Okay, so you're special and all, but yeah, I need this to work for everybody. So we come up with a plan together, and then we agree to it. Now, this is where the accountability comes in. Okay, so you've made a plan, and I can come back to you and I can say, hey, you agreed to do this. Why aren't the dishes washed? You agreed to do this. Why is the garbage still here? Why am I doing this? I went on a trip for a few days, and all my plants, I came home, my plants are dead, right? My daughter, right? So she's like, I come in the door, and she says, Ma, you always come in fussing. I said, you always come in not doing your stuff. So anyway, but we hold people accountable in that way. And the good thing about community accountability is you have to face those people every day when I'm going to work. I don't see you guys, so if you're making the decision, I don't have to be accountable to you. But every day when I leave my house, I'm gonna see my neighbors when my grass is messed up. Yeah, and they're looking at me cross-eyed like, why didn't she cut her grass? But, things like that, we see that accountability every day in community. But when you're, looking at somebody who's way downtown that you'll never see again, it doesn't mean as much. It doesn't mean as much. It just doesn't. But when my neighbors start looking cross-eyed at me, or I call the city because the grass is this high, then there's some accountability. So that's kind of how we do it. That's the whole repair of harm thing. But what makes the CRT very different from the traditional method is that we ask those questions. What has brought this person to that point? What is the trauma? What is the story? What can they tell us about themselves that'll make this response meaningful? I just think we throw a lot of dollars at things that don't make sense. I remember the summer program that they used to have, and Erica's moving, so I know it's my turn. But I remember the summer program where they used to give the kids food to make sure every kid was eating every day, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I went down to that program. My kids wanted to go and eat with their friends and all that kind of thing, and yeah, we could use the money. So we went down to the lunch, and every day they served the same thing for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Jesus. Everything, the same thing, the same sandwiches, the cheese sandwiches, the smushed up peanut butter and jelly thing. I don't know what that's called. 3 options of chips. You got the Sun Chip, you got the Dorito, and that. It's the same lunch, same meal every day. So I said, well, let's go at breakfast. Maybe we'll get some cereal. No. You get the sandwich, you get the peanut butter, you get the Sun Chip or whatever, and the banana. Okay, so who eats the same thing every day for every meal? Please tell me. I don't care how hungry I am. I'm not going to eat the same thing every day for every meal. I'm not going to do it. I'd rather starve. So I'm thinking to myself, who came up with this program? I said, it must have been my ex-husband. Because that's why he used to feed our kids. But nonetheless, I think about the fact that whoever came up with this thing never came to see if it's working on the ground, right? And not to mention, you're feeding monks, kids, you're feeding all these people who eat rice. I'm like, can we get some rice? So I'm just thinking about things like that we throw dollars at that don't work. Mm-hmm. Let's stop doing it. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a waste of money. I mean, I could retire on those dollars. And I'm working real hard, let me tell you. So things like that, I just want us to think about what we're doing. Change those mindsets. Come out of that traditional stuff that doesn't work for us. Now, I love tradition because it suits me. Okay, so some of those things really help us to be stronger, but some of them just don't make sense. Get rid of it. Get rid of that crazy thinking that doesn't work for us. Locking kids up. Cages don't heal. Nobody's getting healed by that process. That's not helping anyone. So let's try to fix our communities. Let's try to, move to this different mindset. Whenever you see somebody and they've done something and you start to make that judgment in your mind, think about, where are they coming from? What is the trauma that has caused them to be in this place? What have they gone through? What is that thing that keeps them doing that behavior? I always ask kids, you know what? I said, that's interesting that you came to start doing that. What's that about? Where did this come from? And sometimes I even have to question myself. Why am I doing these things? Mm-hmm. Why? What sense does it make? And usually it makes no sense at all. It makes no sense at all, and I try to get rid of it. So anyway, Erica's moving closer to me. I know what that
means. Thank you, Brenda. All right, so now we are going to invite our community provider. Dr. Tamara Madison is here. She's been at the table since day 1, or maybe day 0, I don't know, before that. And she runs an organization called Generation to Generation. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Madison and her folks to talk a little bit about some of the youth stories of the young people that they've served.
Good morning. Well, I want to first acknowledge that in 2019, when I was executive director of Dispute Resolution Trust, organization, we partnered with the city attorney's office to provide a restorative response to adults in misdemeanor cases, and that ethos program is still active today. So for me, I've been working with youth for over 30 years, and so creating generation to generation was a model that the older women should teach the younger women, and so that's the premise from what our organization is founded on. And so being at the table with Ramsey County Attorney's Office has been an incredible opportunity. As I shifted from another organization, I've had my organization for 15 years, working part-time in the community with girls groups, and so I understand these kids. I know their adolescent development is the craziest time they probably will have in their whole life, but that's where they need support. So we walk alongside of them, and in our practice, we were proactive in this measure, and none of our children, the girls that we worked with over the past 20 years, they didn't land in this juvenile system. So we know what we do as a restorative practitioner work, so we want to continue that work. So there's a young lady, I'm in the 7th grade, and she's now a junior. And I just want to read some of her, just a couple of things that she wrote. She said, don't make friends based off of where you are in life. Make them based off of where you're going. Don't let the people around you dictate your future. Another, she said, when the flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows. And let's see. So we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them, nor can we continue to do the same things and expect a different outcome. And this person has really been in the system a while, but I know that the work that we're doing and the relationship we have with this family, because we have a relationship with the whole family. We don't just work with the students, and I know a lot of community organizations, they pick one or the other. Well, we do both, and it's a lot of work. So Juliet is our queen of parent involvement and participation. So, Miss Juliet.
Good morning, and thanks for having me. On our team, I am the person who calls the parents, and because you can't separate the parent from the child. There's a lot of trauma going on, not only with the child. Thank you so much, Dr. Ross. He looks out for me. But the parents, and oftentimes it's the mother. And I was one of those mothers. So I can say that when they feel like, I don't understand, my kid is doing this, that, and the other. I said, my kid did it all. I am trained so well because I was trained by the best. But I'm happy to say he's doing well today. But we went through it. I was in these rooms, in the court, calling someone like, help me with this kid. So there's a lot of cry out there from the parents to help with the kids. As community, we understand that. But the biggest thing for me is whether I'm talking with the parent or the child or whoever's in that family, is listening. And it comes up over and over again. We wouldn't even be here if the teacher, the officer, the whatever person had just listened to the story, had listened to the kid. They don't feel heard, and if you don't feel heard, you got to be heard one way or the other. It's just not coming out real positive for them. So listening to them, listening to their stories, and allow them to share. One particular case I'd like to share with you, a young person who is on the autism spectrum. So she's very clear and very precise about what she does, working at a local grocer. Well, she said people was taking the food home, it was expired, and she did the same thing. They watched this kid for like months, and then called her up in the room and said, we're firing you for theft. She had no idea, concept that this was theft. And she said, well, they didn't cover that in the presentation. And we're going, what presentation? She was very clear. This is what I was trained to do. They didn't cover that. I saw other people do it, so I did it. But if they had just spoken with her, just talked with her to see what was going on and brought her parent in. But they called her in, called the cops, arrested her, she got a ticket, and now the parent is furious. So we have to talk through all of that to get to what the problem was, and had they had the conversation and listened to her, she wouldn't be there. But one of our partners have now picked her up and she has another job. So, but again, we listened and then we acted on it, and now we have more trust with her and her parent, and that's what we do in this work.
Thank you very much. So this is everybody's favorite part, the legal framework. So we spent about 8 months with an outside consultant working to develop our legal framework to make sure that it aligns with the delinquency statute that we have in the state of Minnesota, that it considers our duty as prosecutors to be ministers of justice and to exercise discretion when determining how to respond to cases that are sent to us, and then to make sure that it had to develop the elements necessary to protect and share information in this collaborative process to be able to inform our decision. So our delinquency statute has a really clear purpose and policy. The purpose is that it directs us to seek justice through means that are fair and just, that recognize the unique characteristics and needs of children and give them access to opportunities for personal and social growth. The policy is also very clear. It says it's the policy of Minnesota to identify and eliminate barriers to racial, ethnic, and gender fairness within the justice system in support of the fundamental principle of fair and equitable treatment under the law. So you saw our disparity slides. It's a very clear directive that we need to do better. We also like to remind folks that prosecutors, as ministers of justice, their duty is to exercise that discretion. And so both according to the Minnesota Rules of Professional Responsibility and the National District Attorneys Association, prosecutors are directed only to file charges in cases that they consider to be consistent with the interest of justice. So our legal structure is designed to accomplish these 5 things: to clearly define the roles and responsibilities, have those legal protections in place, make sure that we have clear protocols for the creation, dissemination, maintenance, and retention of data, that we support both our staff and our contractors with clear direction and training, and that we're accountable for the privacy and security of the data. So these are the 5 elements of our legal framework. We have a memorandum of understanding, which outlines how we all work together. That's been signed by our community and public defender partners, as well as they've signed contracts for services and non-disclosure agreements to make sure that we protect the data. We also have contracts for services with the youth services providers, and we have administrative process protections, and then our data plan. So our goal, as John mentioned earlier on, is to really focus on continuous improvement. When we were able to see Jeffrey Canada from Harlem Children's Zone, he just said you have to start somewhere and focus on continuous improvement, and that's what we're trying to do. So some of the improvements that we have made to date, as John said, we kind of did a soft launch in July and started. We knew that everything wasn't going to work out the way we'd envisioned. And so one of the initial things that John mentioned earlier on, so I won't elaborate on, is the increased communication with law enforcement. So we've had multiple meetings to really explain to them what we're doing, and to make sure that they're getting input on case progress, because they're not seeing it in the system the same way that they would traditionally. We've expanded our engagement to inform the collaborative review, so we are reaching out to people that have been harmed in the process to get that information at the table. We're engaging families in certain cases to get their input at the table. We also have a county social worker who is a liaison to the collaborative review team, who's there to help advise and also connect with resources that the county might be able to provide. That's been really great. And then we were also able to repurpose a position in our office to enable us to hire a full-term youth services coordinator. So that's Amy Vang, who you met earlier. And her goal is really going to be to measure young people's progress, to work really closely with these providers, to help them troubleshoot, to identify gaps in services, and then help us build out our continuum with more providers to meet those needs, to make sure that the reporting is completed thoroughly and in a timely way so we get the data back to understand if what we're doing is working, and to make sure young people get the support that they need to succeed. And we've also narrowed the cases that we're currently collaboratively reviewing while we continue to build out this process. So this is a slide, I won't read it for you, but the more serious cases are currently not being collaboratively reviewed. And I just want to point out there is a caveat. So if there's any case, if our attorney is reviewing it and they think that there is an immediate public safety risk, they are directed to bring that to the director. And if that requires us to act quickly, we will. So now I want to turn it over to Cara to talk about our evaluation plan and how we plan to measure our results.
Great, thanks, Erica. So this is kind of the third piece of our involvement as research partners to this, is kind of to design the accountability for this systems change, right? If we're asking young people to engage in meaningful accountability, we want to do that too, by being publicly accountable and talk about, is what we want to have happen happening, right? So is this actually happening, and is it happening well? And then does it make a difference? And so we've designed some evaluation aspects to really answer both those questions over time. And so there's forms and data collection and pieces happening with each of those questions. And then if you go to the next slide, we, so some of those specific metrics are, what does the decision-making process look like in that collaborative review team? Are cases actually, moving to community accountability at a different rate than they were before? Are different types of cases being sent to community accountability, so we can see if we're kind of moving the metrics on some of those pieces around youth who have been referred multiple times, youth with more serious behavior. And then ultimately, some of those referral outcomes, right? Once they get referred, are they going through that process successfully? And what kind of community engagement are they having? Are they connecting with caring, additional caring adults in their lives? Are they getting back in school? Those kind of outcomes of the referral process. And then go ahead to the next.
And if I can just add, Tara, so we do have forms that providers are filling out to capture some data, but we're also asking young people and families who've been a part of this process to complete a pretty short survey to really help us understand if they feel like it's helpful in their process. And so that's part of our evaluation.
Which is something that doesn't always happen through the traditional system, right? I don't know how many of you have seen data on how young people feel about a court hearing, for example. But I think that matters, right? Like, we want them to feel like they've been heard. So we're continuously kind of reviewing data and seeing what's been happening. So I'll run through these slides pretty quickly, because ultimately, the big takeaway is we want you to kind of hang with us while we figure out if this is working, right? It's going to be, as we mentioned, we looked at 10 years of data to really understand what was and wasn't working before. So it's going to be a while before we have real comparative data, but that's why we set up kind of metrics to look through, what's happening and how can we kind of say, are we on track, or what else needs to happen, and how can we continuously improve? So, in the last, so essentially in 3 quarters, right, in the last 9 months, we can see that about a third, so this is some of that process data, right? We can see that about a third of the cases are going to the collaborative review team, and then being reviewed for whether community-based accountability might be the best fit. So that's kind of that process, right, of coming into the county attorney's office, getting reviewed by an assistant county attorney, and then being referred on to the CRT if they meet those guidelines that Erica just went through. About a third get declined. That's that kind of traditional view of, was there a crime and is there evidence, right? We don't want to have a net widening effect where we're all of a sudden reviewing everything and now we have more young people in the justice system. So that still happens traditionally. The cases that are on that list of not right now, but hopefully eventually, go through the traditional case review, and then the remainder go to the CRT. And then, this is kind of that blue, those pieces, right, the CRT and those different options there, what Erica showed on that infographic before. So they have those options there. The traditional review also has an option to, refer back to parent or do a petition and then community-based accountability. So there's different, even some of the traditional pathways are kind of slightly shifting to say, can we be more community engaged and work towards those pieces of meaningful accountability? And so, when the CRT does review cases, so 203 reviewed in 9 months, about 4 in 5 end up either going back to parent or to community-based accountability. So those cases really are, shifting kind of the approach and looking for new possibilities. And then we can kind of put that in context of historical data, right? So to that first evaluation question, are our responses actually changing? And what you can see here is they are, but it's pretty gradual, right? Contrary to what you might have heard, this hasn't been a huge, like, everything's changed, right? So you can see that darker section of the slide are the percent of cases that are charged. And we chunk this off into 2-year bits so that we can look at the 21-22 data sooner rather than later and not wait for 10 years to go by. But if we look at kind of 2-year snapshots over time, we did a 2012-2013 as kind of a historical marker. 2017-18 is really the baseline data that we've determined is what we really want to improve on. So that's what we're thinking about as our baseline data. And then 2021-22, this is kind of our preliminary in-progress data. So we can see that, for the first time, the number of cases, the percent of cases charged is now less than 50%. We're still seeing a increase in cases that are declined, but we're grouping those, cases that are declined because we think parents can handle this. That gets grouped into that section, right? Because they never get a formal system response. So those now combine kind of the cases that are declined because there isn't legal sufficiency, and the cases that, maybe are something that could meet a criteria for a crime happening, but maybe it's a curfew violation. Maybe it's a, consumption or possession charge that's the first time. And Brenda calls up a parent and says, "You got this?" And they're like, "Yeah, we got this." And then we don't have what Jim said early on, somebody trying to hold somebody accountable 9 months later to something that was resolved 9 months ago. So that, kind of second group includes those kind of cases. And then the community-based accountability, what used to be a very narrow and prescribed diversion program is now a broader and more comprehensive community-based accountability process and engagement. And so you see that now increasing to 22% of the current cases. And then preliminary outcome data, we don't really have for you because it's too early. But what we can show you is the data that we really want to improve on moving forward. And so this goes back to our 2017, 2018 data and what we really want to improve on. And so what we saw during that time is the 1-year re-referral rates increase as contexts increase, right? We've already talked about the more they come back, the more they come back. And that happens across all factors. So it happens for younger and older youth. It happens across different race and ethnic groups. It happens for both males and females. It happens no matter the severity of harm, and it happens no matter the system response. So so we just see that that re-referral increasing with each re-referral. And so there's about 6 slides that show you that specifically. So for example, you see that bottom is if they come on a first referral, and this is breaking down by younger and older youth, about 30% will come back for a second referral. So this is a 1-year re-referral rate, the percentage of youth in each of those groups, right? So that bottom grouping is, roughly total is about 30%, but it's 20% of our older youth and 30% of our younger youth. When they come back a second time, now that older age group jumps up to almost 40%. And that youngest, so this is what I was talking about of having ineffective responses for our youngest youth, that 10 to 14 age group should be 11 to 14. We shouldn't have 10-year-olds in the juvenile system. That jumps up to now over 50%. So more than 1 and 2 are coming back again. That's just kind of what this data look like. And then you see that same pattern for males and females. You see the same pattern across different racial and ethnic groups. And you see the same pattern by severity, right? So notice how similar all these are. I mean, we think that it's really different based on, it must be like there's something different about misdemeanors versus felony. Look at how, similar these rates are, right? That would be not significantly, statistically significant differences in our speak. But ultimately about, 25% of cases based on the severity come back a second time. If it's, if they come back, if they're in a second time, it's now over 40% come back a third time. And if they're in a third time, we're now well over 50% on average come back a fourth time. So this is the stuff we really want to change with this new system. Same based on the decisions within the system. So we see here consistently community-based accountability is the most effective response. So that's the lowest, even though it goes up each time, it's the response that ends up with the least amount of recidivism. And then the highest two are a charge and some kind of system response like a guilty plea or a finding of guilt, or a charge and a dismissal, which is the way kind of non-accountability happened in the previous system, right? So kind of both of those end up with similar rates of recidivism. And so, but ultimately, right, it's the similar pattern that we wanna address. And so going forward, as we talked about, we want to continue to focus on continuous improvement. We're going to keep looking at these data of the referral and review process, the success within the community-based accountability, and anything we can do to make sure that there's engagement and that, you know, as community hears about this, that they're trusting when somebody calls and says, hey, we're from Ramsey, we're from the county, that it's an invitation rather than something to fear. Again, tracking measures. We'll be revisiting these metrics at least every 6 months. And then we hope that we'll have some, you know, I said it's too early for outcome data, but, you know, even in looking at it, so if we're looking at re-referral rates within 1 year, we had, you know, 50 or so cases that were fully resolved by the end of 2021, so we might be able to start looking at that by the end of 2022. And then truly, you know, that 2-year window that will compare to 17-18 won't be available until the end of 2024. So just kind of to put that timeline on our radar.
Thank you, Cara. And so we just want to invite you to be involved in the work that we're doing. Our restorative practitioners want to invite you to come sit in a circle with them, because you can't really understand what it is and what it looks like unless you participate. So they want you to know you are all welcome to participate in Circle. We need to continue to invest in this work. You know, this work does take a significant amount of investment, and in order to do it right, we need to be better partnering with parents. We need to be better engaging with community, and it takes resources for our community to be able to come to the table to afford to be able to do this with us. And so we need to continue those investments. And then Cara also wanted to offer, if anyone wants to learn more about restorative responses in general and why they're more effective than punitive responses, she's more than happy to meet with you individually. So with that, I think we'll wrap up and take questions. We really appreciate all of your attention. I know it was a long PowerPoint, but we're happy to stand for questions.
Okay, I have Nicole and Trista.
Thank you.
I'll go around the team.
I have one question in here, but they'll be talking as well. First, I want to reiterate the call to join a circle. I got to do my first ethos circle last week, and it was, I think we all just cried the whole time. It was wonderful and a really beautiful experience, and it reinvigorates my passion for this work. And it wasn't with a youth offender, but I think the experience applies, and it's yeah, it was just incredible, and it still gets me teared up thinking about it. And I also, in terms of the learning more, I'm so glad you had a Fania Davis quote, because her book, The Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice, I cannot recommend it enough. I've already recommended it at least twice to this board, so I'll do it again. It's very powerful. It's a quick read. Pick it up. And I think it really does a good job to Dr. Rogers' point that racial healing can't exist without transformation of our criminal justice system, because Ms. Davis' argument is about that we can't just be warriors for racial justice. We also have to be healers. We have to be warrior healers, or we won't be able to accomplish our goals in that. And then I wanted to share this very well-researched quote that I found on Instagram, and I'll acknowledge that it had the whole African proverb after that, and that's problematic because Africa is a continent, not a country, but it really speaks to what we've talked about how exclusionary responses are more damaging and traumatizing, and that, you know, youth are going to be heard one way or another, and the quote was that the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. So we need to embrace our kids. And back to my early education training, when one of the social and emotional programs that we used, one of the quotes that stuck with me was, "The kids who need the most love ask for it in the most unloving ways." So the question that I have, I do have one. There was a ton of data about the disparities in youth who are involved and brought into the system. And I want to ask, and knowing that it likely isn't there, about whether there's been any exploration of that data by socioeconomic status. And I say that not to diminish or deny the racial disparities, which are there, and there for both implicit and explicit bias reasons, only because I want to be able to connect this work to work that we're doing, such as our economic inclusion plan, that our economic inclusion plan is not just an economic plan, it's also a public health and wellness plan, and it is also a public safety plan, because I think that makes the work that we're doing in that arena even more powerful. So that was my question.
Thank you. So Chair, Commissioner Fred, I really appreciate you raising that. And, you know, we use some proxies in the system for socioeconomic data, so we don't have specific data. We do know that most of the kids referred to us qualify for public defender, which means that they would be experiencing poverty.
Thank you.
Trista? Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. As a parent, I was feeling really validated in the frustrations in parenting children that often get, you know, they misbehave and then they get suspended from school, and you're like, wait a minute, how did we go from misbehavior to suspension, and what does that do? And so on that note, you know, where does the school system fall in this line? Because if they're coming to your office, we've already failed them in the system long before they got to you. And then as a follow-up is that when kids go through this and now they've been in circle, they've learned new processes, how do we return them to the system that failed them? Because they're gonna have to go back to school. And when I say system, I mean adults, quite frankly, who failed them. And they're gonna have to go back as authority figures in the public school system or whatever. How do you do that handover?
Chair and Commissioner Mattis-Castillo, thank you for asking that question. So we have had, you know, years ago, we actually had a community task force on safe schools. We engaged a lot of community folks and school folks, and a lot of them share the same frustrations with how do we respond to young people's behavior. We're really struggling with it, which is why we wanted to point out that excluding young people, suspending them, kicking them out of rec centers, kicking them out, like, doesn't help, right? They feel completely excluded. They're not getting their needs met, and we know that behavior will change when needs are met. So we are starting right now in building out the process that we have and really being intentional about that process, and like we said, focusing on continuous improvement. But you saw in our vision slide at the beginning that it also includes, our vision is really that more of this can be responded to in the community. It's ideal for schools to have restorative processes. They have them to, like, inconsistently across our county. We actually just met with Quora, which is in 916. They're responding to young people who have, they're like level 4 schools, so they're the highest need young people. They were really impressive when they talked about their restorative approach and how they tell young people ahead of time, like, if harm is caused in our buildings, this is how we're going to respond, and their restorative process starts right away, which when we were meeting with them, and their teachers have been trained, I mean, it was really impressive. But then we're meeting with them and they're saying, we're doing this right away. And then 2 or 3 months later, the parent gets a call and says, we need to address this thing that happened, right? So we know that schools, traditionally, we've received about 10% of our cases from schools. That, of course, went down during the pandemic. But we know that we need to continue to engage schools. We invited some of our superintendents from the county to our violence reduction leadership group to kind of share some of the challenges they're having about kids disengaging from school and kind of falling off the radar, or kids showing up in school. They call it in-school truancy, but they're not actually going to class. So we have folks in our community that are employed in our schools trying to help with that, with those things. But I do think there's a ton of opportunity in that space for us to, as we continue to build this out, for us to continue to engage schools and think about how do we continue to build out those restorative practices throughout our community.
And I'd also like to say that what we do is return them to those communities with skills to sit in circle and with their stories. They can take those stories back and feel free to share that with, even with people who are not restorative. And I tell people all the time, there's no substitution for human interaction. When you come to somebody and you tell them your story and you tell them, you know, how you want to be treated differently, or you want to have a conversation with them, it makes a big difference even before the person is restorative. So I would say to you that we return those students with skills for Circle, but also equipped with their stories, ready to share, so.
And if I can jump in too, I would just add that I'm really appreciating the public health lens that you all are bringing to this, right? As we move upstream, that's kind of what I've brought to the data question too. And so I think all of those things matter. If you're actually talking about violence prevention, that's, you know, equalizing opportunity. And then figuring out kind of what does meaningful accountability look like in our school system, within our parents, absolutely to that. And we will never get to a place that there is no violence in our community. We will never get to a place that there is no harm in our community. And so what I really appreciate about this process is that we are looking at this decision point, how can we do better? And how can we reduce the violence that happens because of poor decisions at and so meaningful accountability at all those decisions points, because conflict is inherent to the human condition, and we need to, have processes that help us grow and learn when we make mistakes in behavior, and also figuring out how to prevent more violence, which is the things you two are both getting at, absolutely to that as well. Yeah.
I have Jim and Victoria. I'll go back and forth.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick comments or observations, and then maybe I'd like to hear some feedback. I participated with John, actually, and Superintendent Gothard and Mayor Carter in a restorative circle when the community was calling us out on a county, city, school kind of joint policy piece, right? It was really helpful to kind of get that perspective and to be able to hear, but then also for community to kind of hear, from us about how this came about and how we move forward on that. I think that piece needs to continue to be built, because it's not just about, the kids that all of a sudden come into the system, but it's about changing the system, and integrating the system. So bringing policymakers, bringing people into these circles to be able to have these conversations ahead of time that can actually start changing some of the policy or some of the systems that actually help create what you're trying to intervene on right now, I think is going to be helpful. That was really a powerful experience. I know for me, all of us as participants, I offered every single one there to go out to dinner one-on-one, so we could get to know each other, and we did that, and we continue to build on that. So I think we need more of those at, policy level type decision-making, where community and policymakers come together on that. And plugged in so many other ways, but the piece that I'd like to hear some feedback, because listening to all this, and this is where I sometimes get, and I think everybody that was in that restorative practice, that circle that we were in, John, came from heart and mind, right? They came from that, knowing that there was harm created by decisions that we were making, but not really understanding how we got to those decisions, and the harm wasn't intentional, it was there. But for us to really sort that. But everybody in that room really came from heart and mind with the good intentions. And where I'm trying to get an understanding, how much do we have to work with community itself? Because, the punishment response has come from community, right? That's where there's so many in community, that's all they want to see is, I was harmed, I need punishment as the result. I don't need anything else. Or I don't need to see that person who created harm, take them out of community so that they're not a part of community anymore. Or maybe, and I'd certainly disagree with me, but maybe on the other side where rather than, the accountability piece, but doing it with empathy and understanding and listening, more of, because of past harm, it becomes more of protecting and enabling, and we don't get to accountability. How do we prepare community for these circles to be able to come from heart and mind, but from kind of the shared understanding? So it's not necessarily this end or this end, but it's, what we're hoping these conversations that these circles can provide, and not being restrictive of that, but not allowing, kind of these ends to end up not allowing us the goals we're trying to put forward. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
It does to me.
So, Chair and Commissioner, I appreciate you raising that. Brenda was one of the community members in those circles we participated in, so I don't know if you remembered that, but I want to thank her for continuing to engage with us productively.
I didn't get my invitation to dinner, though, Jim.
I'm sorry?
I didn't get my invitation to dinner.
Well, we'll get to that one.
Okay. But I just want to let you know, we were doing some of those circles in community. We were inviting system leaders and community to come share. We were doing them, Brenda, maybe every couple months or so until COVID happened. And and then, of course, we haven't met for a while. But I do think that that's really valuable, and it helps us identify with each other and make better decisions because we have more grounding in community. But I also want to let Dr. Madison, I think, address your point about what people who've been harmed are looking for in the process.
So what is very interesting is when we first reach out to someone who has been harmed, if we introduce their invitation as inviting their voice to the table, we tend to get participation. We've never seen somebody who did not participate as a person harmed not appreciate the process. Mm-hmm. And so we just keep sending the invitation, and those that show up, their mindsets are very much impacted because then they humanize this thing or the situation and find out what was going on for this individual prior to the incident, and then it becomes about the person and not the incident. So it really does work. So we just continue to invite those people to the table, and it's voluntary. So when they do participate, we've never seen them not be very appreciative, have been valued.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And my personal vision for this work is that every community will have community circles.
Everyone.
That we could have it in each community. So if people are coming out of incarceration, or if people are in transition, or maybe somebody has just moved into the community and is lonely on their block, that there is a circle available that they can just happen into. You don't have to earn your space in community and in circle. You just come and join. So my personal vision is that we'll have those circles all over the city, so that we don't necessarily, well, in the African tradition, it's that you don't necessarily have to go to a government body to work out your conflicts. So we come together, we talk about it and what works for us and what doesn't work in community, and sometimes that's enough just to let people know that they belong, because we have to realize that belongingness, being accepted into a community, is a need. It is not an accessory. It is essential. And we as people need that. And when we don't provide that for people and they feel blocked or, ostracized, that's when you have all of those behaviors. And that's a communication to us that they need us, right? So that's my personal vision. So when that happens, I think you will see a huge change in the whole critical mass, if that ever happens. Not if, when that happens.
There you go.
I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Tony, then Mary Jo, then Tony.
Thank you. Well, the thoughts that are going through my mind are kind of mixed up in many ways, because I have to tell you, this has been a passion of mine for a long time. People kind of look at me and think of me as the environmental commissioner, but the fact is my doctoral dissertation was on preventing juvenile crime and the costs associated with that, because what you're talking about doing in that transition between punishment and trying to really change the trajectory of a young person's life and the community in the process is not something that happens overnight, and there's a cost associated with it. And most often it seems like the things that make headlines are the crimes that are committed, and not about the crimes that didn't get committed, because it's kind of hard to report on that. We had a program called All Children Excel that was based in that, had a risk assessment tool that was for younger children. When a child was brought into that and determined to be part of ACE, it was so that you could work with the entire family, because it's not just an isolated incident. One size doesn't fit all, and quite frankly, if something isn't working, stop doing it. And so pretty basic things there. But I took that program along with 4 others that were proven juvenile crime prevention programs and put a dollar amount to them, tried to. Actually, it's on my website, on the county website, on my webpage, if you want to look at the dissertation. The data is old now, but the concept isn't. One size doesn't fit. You need to listen to people. You need to know what their backstory is. You need to involve their family and the community. And you can't do, in most cases, it's not one and done.
Right.
And that's the way we've treated criminal behavior or bad behavior. It's, okay, we'll treat that and we're done with it. And you get punished for that and then you're on your own after that. Well, it doesn't work. We all know that it doesn't work. So trying to figure out what the other options are is so incredibly important. And I think, again, evaluation. Doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but that's the only way you figure out if you're doing something right or wrong. And what's right for one may not be right for the other. In fact, you can almost guarantee that it isn't. And really trying to open that up to say, this is what we're really trying to do. It's not about punishment. It is about making a difference in one child's life that goes to the family, that goes to the community, that goes to beyond that, the ripple effect of that. Just like the ripple effect of the criminal behavior has a negative impact when you change that, when you offer something else, when you value. I mean, the whole idea behind ACE was all children excel. Didn't matter what you did. We're going to try to figure out how we can help you so that you get out of that. And so this is bringing up all kinds of emotions in me that I wasn't really expecting. But I do think that when we're talking about doing these things, and I hope it doesn't sound heartless, but it costs money to do it. And we need to figure out how to make that happen and make it sustainable, because the reason that ACE doesn't exist is because the funding went away. And quite frankly, at the end of it, when it was dwindling, it really wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, not what it did in the beginning, because we couldn't do it justice. So when we're talking about this, I guess the most important thing for me, and it's not a question, but an observation, is we need to understand the individual, the family, and the community, and how they all fit together. It's not one and done, because we won't be effective in changing that trajectory for the entire community. And we need to talk about how we make sure that it is sustainable into the future, because there is that time in between where people are already on the pathway, and at a certain point it's very difficult to change that pathway. But we can make that change if we do it and don't walk away from it. Because it's hard work. You know it's hard work. And we've seen it happen too many times. And so I just, we're in it for the long haul, and I know that, John, your office is in it for the long haul. We talked about this when you first were elected and how we needed to change how things were looked at. And so I am incredibly proud of the work that's being done here, and we've just got to keep it going. I think part of the reason that ACE maybe didn't come to its full value is because it was before its time.
Yeah.
People are paying attention now. Grab it. Because they actually see that something can happen, something positive can happen. And I don't know that people saw that 20 years ago.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mary Jo?
Thanks. I'm going to just keep on with, following on with Victoria's theme of this is work that many of us have seen, some of this work before, and it just hasn't been continued. And so I'm just so grateful for your work in continuing it on and the courage that you had to bring it through community for this, because not all community thinks this is the greatest work when you don't prosecute juveniles. I mean, I know everybody's office got calls from people. Why are you not, we have a huge crime rate, I don't feel safe. Why are you not putting these kids in jail? So I just so appreciate your willingness to document the things that are happening, to provide the data, and then to just keep pushing forward on this, because this is really important work, and we just need to keep fighting for it, I think. And over 30 years ago when I was in law school, wow, that was a long time ago. One of my part-time jobs was doing neighborhood mediation. I worked for a neighborhood mediation project and I set up these circles. And it is so powerful. I think probably everyone on this board has probably been a part of these circles, but they are so powerful. But just to bring that offender together with the victim and have them talk it out, it's super amazing. And you all know this. And so we know this work is important and works. The Northeast Youth and Family Services, they set up these diversion programs. I don't even know, hopefully we're still doing that. Schools, I hope they're still doing they have groups set up where kids are the mediators. So I'm hoping that continues on. But to make sure that all this work is connected is just, is so important, and I know you all know that, and I'm just validating it. Whatever we can do to help with that, I want to let you know that I think we're all on board. I'm sure we're all on board with that. Just a quick question about maybe how you are connecting with, now many of our communities are getting social workers, embedded in their law enforcement. I know Maplewood as, Roseville as. How are you working with them? And then with our collaboratives, I know that our collaboratives are these great community partners, the Suburban Ramsey Family Club, the St. Paul Children's Collaborative, Children's Mental Health. These are all great community partners that I hope we're including in all of this work. And so just wanted to ask you that question. And I just have to tell you a cute story about when my nephew was in kindergarten, and he's 30 years old now, but a long time ago. And he was very precocious as he could be. And as a McGuire, he would be distracted because if he wasn't engaged totally in the content, you'd find something else to do. And I spent a lot of time in the principal's office. But it was, he was put in detention as a kindergartner. And I'm like, oh my God, who puts kindergartners in detention? So he's in detention, and his 3-year-old brother, when he was coming home from detention, said, "What'd they do to you? What'd they do to you?" And he goes, this is a 5-year-old. Well, he said, they set me in a room and let me sit there. Now, what did that teach me? I mean, like, these kids, they get it. I mean, they don't, you got to do something that matters to them. At least he was in school. I mean, they didn't at least, put him outside or put him in, send him home. But yeah, put him in a cell. Honestly, put him in a cage. Right, at least they didn't put him in a cage. I'm sure he did something that he needed to think about. But anyway, so these kids, people get it, and right. We need to do something that means something to them and matters to them, and we all know that. So just thank you. But I'm assuming you're working with all the collaboratives and with everybody, because I know they want to work with you.
Yeah, just briefly, Chair and Commissioner McGuire, we have had multiple shorter versions of this presentation in different aspects of our community, but we've really had to put a lot of resources into building out this collaborative process. But as we get that up and going, we are looking forward to more opportunities. We've been collaborating and trying to think differently with some of our law enforcement jurisdictions that are approaching us with cases, and some of the challenges of the families that they continue to see one sibling and then the next sibling and then the next sibling. So how can we think differently about that? So we're absolutely with you in terms of collaborating further.
Thank you.
And social services.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we're,
Yes.
Okay.
we're also adding to our list of providers that we're referring to in the community. So, we add to that list. How many do we have now? 10 or
About
something?
10, I think.
And I
Yep.
think ACE is one of the providers that is on there.
The one through 180 degrees.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I thought it was interesting when you brought up the money, because even though this process does cost money, conversations are cheaper than court process, and community members are cheaper than attorneys, right? So I would think that would save us some money, but maybe what we're trying to do is both, as opposed to doing one or the other. So in not making that decision is costing us more. But I would think, that it would be cheaper to do this process and more meaningful. So I don't know. That's just what I'm wondering.
The title of my dissertation is it's an ounce of prevention, taxpayer costs avoided through preventing crime. It is all about showing how you actually save money. And it's as conservative as you can possibly get. And it still is amazing.
Okay.
And we need to have people understand that you can get a lot more done.
Right.
But decisions are made, and this is the reason that I did it, and I know I'm out of turn here, but the reason that I did it that way was because there are political leaders that make decisions based on what is right. There are political leaders that make decisions on how much it costs, but most are in the middle. But if you didn't know what it cost, you can't show how it will save money and lives and community. And so so I chose 5 different programs to apply that standard to. And you might find it interesting because it does put a dollar amount. That's what's really outdated at this point because it's old dollars. But you can still see that it saves money and improves our community. Duh. You know?
Tony, thank you for your patience. Go ahead.
It has been wonderful to hear this presentation today, and I want to say thank you to the county attorney, to the staff, and to the community for the valuable work that you've been doing together on all our behalf. What I really love about this, and I'll just make a couple of comments, I do have a final question that I'll ask for some insights on, but what I think we all really love about this is that we're not just talking about a program. We're really talking about a foundation of a way of doing things. You know, this has been an incredible transformation over time in Ramsey County overall, not just in the county attorney's office, but embracing a foundation of a vision for a community where all are valued and thrive, and the goals that we have set forth, and really strategizing as to how we make that happen across the board with structural change that connects us all together across departments and into the community. So thank you for that. I also just wanted to say a lot of questions have been asked about how we impact the front end, you know, that family stabilization side through collaboration. And clearly we have the benefit of our being able to work together in the service team, but across service teams in order to inform and impact the growth of that family stabilization work that Ramsey County wants to do, is growing together with the county attorney and with other departments, you know, who meet families at different phases. So thank you for connecting that. I was going to ask about that before, but someone already did. And the second part is, I know that there are impacts to that deeper end work. You know, clearly you've shown that we're not taking those cases that result in death or that are violent, highly violent, or had the firearm involved, or those cases that we are leaving with the traditional, but we're impacting that traditional end as well because of time and resources and attorney capacity to handle those cases differently. So if you might talk a little bit about the impacts in that arena, that's where some of the dollar savings can go for us, I'm sure, but also about the ability that we have to even think about the way of doing those traditional cases as we see what is working in this environment. Could you talk just a little bit about what impacts we see or foresee in that arena?
Yeah, so Chair and Commissioner Carter, I appreciate that question. And again, we're just at the beginning stages of this, but we are hoping, so our attorneys are still handling the more serious cases, as you pointed out. But they are thinking differently and using more, so that third box where they can petition a case and then send it for community-based accountability, that's something that they've started to use increasingly. And because they've been able to sit in some of these spaces, because they've had the benefit of some experience around restorative practices and they're starting to better understand all of this, they're looking at those cases differently. So I appreciate you lifting that up. And we are still working with them on, some of those alternative options to the traditional court process. And so while we can't share specifics, some of our practitioners have been involved in some of those cases as well. So our youth services are not just available for cases that have been collaboratively reviewed, they're available for any case in our office. The other thing I'd like to add to what, when you started your earlier point, part of the frustration our attorneys had expressed is that sometimes when needs come up in the traditional system, like say a young person and family needs some family therapy and they're on probation. Well, they've been through the process, they're on probation, they've had their first few sessions, they're just starting to get to know the therapist or starting this process, but then the young person gets off of probation and then the resource goes away. So we want to be really intentional. You know, our providers cannot engage. We don't want them to engage through the justice system for months and months or years, but yet we acknowledge that some of these young people and families need that support. And so we want to be really intentional about how do we have that handoff? What does that handoff look like so their justice system involvement can end, but the support does not end, that they continue to get their needs met in community with social services, and we're not dropping the ball on them.
Thank you very much for addressing both those ends, and I look forward to hearing more.
And I would just like to add is that we're not looking never to incarcerate, but never to incarcerate without a plan. Never to suspend without a plan, just to leave someone there with no rehabilitation, with no healing, with nothing. Because even in the schools, when they feel like the kids need a break and they suspend the kids, suspend them with a plan to bring them back in a certain way or to have that healing happen before they come back. You know, don't just leave them there and, you know, put them on that desert island by themselves. You know, let's surround them with community, let's surround them with support, and wait for them to come around. You know, like they were saying, that age 25 development, until that time, we're going to probably remind them about 100 times, just like I did my daughter before my plants died. But the thing is that we have to still keep at it. And sometimes when they get to that age, it just clicks. It just clicks. If you have your own kids, you know that they come to a level of maturity where it doesn't make sense anymore, right? So I just say, you know, I want to say that we're not looking never to incarcerate, but always have a plan. Have something that brings them back to the community. Have a way to bring them back because everybody needs it.
Okay, I'm going to give everybody 2 minutes. Go ahead, Mary Jo.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, because of course we all care about this so much, and we're just so grateful for this work being done. And you've sort of touched on it already, Erica, and I just want to again thank you, County Attorney, and all the team for just sticking with this and being courageous. And we got to make this part of the whole system because we never want this to go away. I mean, we just want this to stay there. But when we decline a case, you know, or the parents say, I got this, you know, they may think they got it, but they may need more resources. So, you know, we all are about prevention, of course, and early intervention. So we don't actually want to make them, we don't want to serve them, you know, when they start trying, you know, being maybe justice involved. We want to get them before that. So I'm just hopeful that we've got some, John was mentioning something about human services too here, but just so that we're working with our, obviously our families, but working with the early intervention services to make sure that when the families say they got it, they get help getting it. And when they say, no, we don't need them to be there, that we're helping with that. So.
Yes, Chair and Commissioner McGuire, to answer your question, we have, so that first bucket is not just refer to family, it's refer to family and community resources. And so that's part of the process, is engaging that parent about, you know, do you have, and some of the parents already have other things in place. Like we had a parent that said he did that 4 months ago, but he's been in therapy, it's going really well. Can we make this a part of his therapy? You know, really innovative things that we never would have been able to come to before. So we are definitely asking those questions of parents, and if there is a way we can connect them to resources in the community or through social services, we're definitely doing it.
And with the decline ones, do we follow up at all, or do they just sort of go off the radar?
John?
So the decline cases are cases in which there is insufficient evidence that even a crime occurred, or that we just, you know, there's not enough evidence there, right? So our involvement necessarily wouldn't be the place for it. However, I think you touched on a point that I think is really critical, and I need to put it on the table because everybody needs to hear this. But, you know, I've heard over the course of the past year of just a lot of families that are struggling with wanting and needing help. And the justice system, you know, they're looking for the justice system to help them, but it's not delivering that service, right? And so obviously, even if we got a case, we decline it because there's not enough evidence, somehow we've got to figure out a way that our community is coming together to, even though that something can't happen on our end, something needs to happen to support families, community supporting parents, because I've just heard it way too much. And I really believe that the success of what we're trying to do here really is to figure out a way also to help those families so that we don't have a mother who says, you know, I need help and nobody's helping me. It's just, I cringe when I hear that, because we're not equipped to necessarily help all the time, right? And it shouldn't be that we can only help when there's a case involved. We need to have something, just like a walk-in place, or just something that somebody gets to work. And that's, I think, the really critical piece that we all need to just make sure that we can figure that out. Because typically in the way that we've been raised to believe is that it's these systems that you have to go through this door or this door, right? And we need to figure out a way so that it's just much simpler and transparent and just right there about what, if somebody needs help, we are delivering it.
Thank you.
Okay, Jim?
Yeah, and it's not a criminal justice story.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
we're in a sad state if a parent's saying,
Right.
that's the only door that I can get my kid in
We've
for
been
help.
raised-
and
we've been raised
beg
to
for
believe that the only door is the
we're in a
criminal
sad
justice
state,
door.
so.
Right, and it can't
And
be.
that's part, and I appreciate the chair here, and I got the luck when I raised my hand. But I did want to revisit this really quickly, because I didn't want to, Nicole brought up the socio-economic, it's been acknowledged, but early on, you kind of talked about, the East Side and Highland, right? And walking out in libraries and rec centers and parks. The fact is, infrastructure matters. But my mom grew up on the East Side. I grew up on the East Side. I raised my 4 kids on the East Side. We've got more rec centers than Highland. We've got 3 wonderful libraries, 2 that have had major investments over the last 10 years. The third is Get One. We're booked in by Phelan Park and Battle Creek Rec Center, all connected by beautiful trails. And sometimes it's easy for us to blame investment in community when it's really social economic. The difference is the poverty on the East Side versus Highland Park. When those kids walk out the door, they're thinking about all the opportunities they have today. And when those parents watch those kids walk out the door, they're looking forward to hearing about those kids' and what opportunities came to them and the stories and telling them about their day. On the East Side, our kids walk out those doors just wondering how they're going to survive the day, right? And the hopelessness that goes along with the poverty that's on the East Side. And those parents aren't thinking about what they're going to hear about all the great things that happened to their kids that day. They're just hoping they walk through the door safe at the end of the day. And that's the difference. And certainly rec centers and libraries and parks matter. But when you look at East Side and Highland Park, we've got the investments in that community. It's about the fact that we do not have the community support to address the poverty. And the poverty disparities are just like every single graph you've got there on that, and actually are what is the contributing factor for almost everything that occurs in the criminal justice system, because of the survival and hopelessness the survival-based living through the day and the hopelessness that goes along with the poverty that we have in our community. So I just wanted to address that a little bit, because I've worked hard to make sure we got all these infrastructure investments on the East Side to help support families that we can, and really trying to get a deeper understanding of what is happening. And it really is that piece of it, and that big difference where kids come in our community. And yeah, it's geographic, because we've concentrated poverty, we've pushed poverty over here, and we've allowed communities to develop in ways. We talk about it in our affordable housing and how communities develop, right? And we're trying to break down those barriers, because we're talking about it throughout the county. But we've created communities where we concentrate poverty and we concentrate wealth. And there is a real struggle to get investment sometimes in those communities, but it's if we just focus in on the investment and not the root cause of what's occurring, we're fooling ourselves into saying another library will solve the problem, when it's not. Another library is not going to solve the problem.
Nicole.
So I want to respond to something Jim said earlier about how much we need to work with the community itself and how do we prepare a community for circles. And I'll just say community is ready, you just have to make the space. Commissioner Reinhardt joined me last summer for dialogue circles on the Rice Creek Commons development. And no one coming into those had done them before, and they showed up and they were weirded out by it, but they stuck through, and every single one of them was magical. And this is where it comes to the point of that triangle diagram about transforming mental models. We cannot just do restorative justice when it comes to this, because that's like saying, I want to start running, getting off a couch and starting with a marathon. This is the hardest place to employ restorative practices, to believe in the good and the humanity of people, is to start with crime. And that is about bringing it back to everything we do, because that's how we change the mental models. When we embed restorative practices into how we engage with the community on everything, not just when there's a problem, but before there's a problem. We start not with the town hall, not with here's our plan, but let's have a conversation about what is needed and bring people in, because then you're all equals in that circle. You're not the one coming in telling us what to do. And then you do it also internally. If we treat our internal staff and manage conflict, which is inevitable, with restorative practices, everyone has that as their baseline of how we address issues, and they bring that out into the community. So restorative practices, how do we transform that mental model? We don't just stick to restorative justice, we talk about restorative practices, and we embed it in every single thing we do.
And I promise I will keep this short, because it's just a statement, and I'm going to encourage you to work with the schools as well, because the one thing about ACE is that it was for children under 10, because you can't be charged with a crime in Minnesota if you're under 10. And I will tell you that the kids that went through this to begin with, in fact, the very first case that we had was a sexual assault. Children under 10. And so trying to go into the schools, and that was where we were able to get, how do we get the information? Because and the county attorney's office was involved as well. So I love what is happening right now, but let's try to take it, because we know that these behaviors don't start at 10. And working with those children younger, and probably the schools is a way to do that. Done.
Thank you. Thank you guys for all your good work. Lots of information and that we're digesting and will continue to digest. You have our support. We got to make sure we make this sustainable for the future when we're not around the tables. So it continues. And I'm sure we'll come back, because we're going to be doing a lot of evaluation and a lot of tweaking, I'm sure. Nothing's perfect, but we're on the right path, and I want to thank you all for the great work you've done. Thank you.
Yeah.